This is House Planning Help, episode 292. Hello, I'm Ben Adam Smith, and this is the podcast for you if you're interested in self-build, because I'm exploring what houses we should be building in the 21st century and trying to break down the major roadblocks that may get in our way. Coming up, I've got two for the price of one. I'm chatting to Mark McCall from Automated Home and Scott McMurray from Epitome Living. We're going to be looking at what home automation is worth having. And there's some quite interesting context here, actually, because Mark built a house probably going on for 20 years ago and was coming back round to a second project. He joined the Hub, so I've been honoured to get to know him over the last few years. But on the very first day he joined, Alex Baines got in contact with me and he said, "Have you seen Mark McCall has joined the Hub?" And I thought, all right, quickly, a bit of Googling. And that led me back to Mark's blog. And Mark must be probably one of the earliest bloggers that we've got over here. Certainly, I was thinking, when did I start using the internet? And it can't have been much earlier than when Mark was writing his initial blog about his house build. And that means he's had home automation in the first house. Very different project coming a second time round. So there's some great aspects to our discussion today. Looking forward to it. So first of all, let's establish how Mark and Scott know each other.
I guess it was 2017 that we said, yes, finally, let's go for it. Let's buy this site and make a start. And shortly after that, we attended one of the many self-build shows that we've gone to over the last few years. And it was there that we met Scott from Epitome Living.
Yeah, it was the first show that we ever did, actually. It was the Luxury Home Show. And we were standing there on the show stand, selling our wares, as it were. And Mark came over a little bit inquisitive. And we soon realised who he was and his background. And the strange circularity of all of this, of course, is that it was many years ago that I first read about Cat5 cabling on Mark's blog back in the probably early 2000s, I'm sure that was. So strange how these things come around again.
Yeah, Mark, we've got to mention this blog. I think it's already come up in the conversation.
Yes, so thank you. Automatedhome.com or .co.uk. We did our self-build in the sort of mid to late 90s, the first self-build, and looking around then, there wasn't much information on smart homes, certainly not in the UK. There was a bit in the US. So I started a blog in 1996, I think it was September 96, so coming up to 25 years ago next year, which ultimately we ended up with the URL automatedhome.com.
And that means you're a bit of an expert in this area, so it's quite interesting. Oh, well, right, okay, you're debating this. You had automation in your first home, didn't you?
We did. We had some early X10 equipment, but I spent the last 20 years trying lots of different systems, and I would say I'm definitely not an expert in any one area. I think I know a little, possibly about a lot. That's why it was vital to get someone like Scott on board, who was a real expert in LuxZone. We'd chosen LuxZone probably before we started to build. I said to Helen that if we're going to do it in this house, we're going to do it right, and we're going to do LuxZone or nothing. So it was always going to be LuxZone.
So why LuxZone? Because I know that there are different standards, aren't there, and proprietary systems. So how did you land up there? Is it the sort of right at the top of the mountain, this one?
It's not. I mean, there are lots of systems out there. There are DIY systems and budget systems, and then there are hugely expensive multi-million pound systems as well. And LuxZone, to me, was always the sweet spot, more reliable than a DIY system, much more affordable than some of the very expensive, mostly American systems. So we always loved the integration that LuxZone has as well. The biggest problem in the smart home, as Scott will hopefully agree, is integration these days, and LuxZone's designed with all the products that work together flawlessly. Over the years, I've probably come to see the proprietary nature of LuxZone as one of its greatest strengths. It's similar to a certain fruit-based smartphone company. You're paying maybe a little extra over and above the cheaper alternatives, but you're getting lots of things there: privacy, security, the guarantee of interoperability. It's probably less focused on home cinema and some of the more whizzy things, although it can do all that, of course. But it's more about building management. Areas probably I'm more interested in these days: energy, lighting, heating control. It's clever logic blocks for shading and blind automation. It's highly reliable, obviously, as well. You can interface with other standards like KNX. You can connect your heating system through a Modbus interface. It supports RS-232, DALI, infrared, as well as normal dimmers, I/O relay extensions, and even some virtual I/O for API integration. So there were lots of reasons for picking Luxone. And of course, Scott, the importance of support, obviously, from your partner and ultimately the company itself. I think probably Scott, whenever he was starting out in his business, had to look around at the alternatives too, to decide which system that he was going to launch his company installing. So probably Scott is able to tell you about why he picked Luxone as well.
Absolutely, Mark, and that was crucial for us. It took a bit of time to figure out the best path, and it was after a bit of an R&D trip, I suppose, to a large trade show over in mainland Europe that we really nailed that down, that there was going to be a Luxone-based solution at the core. And you've hit the nail on the head there a few times with some of the features that it can offer. Obviously, technically very impressive, but in terms of reliability and the kind of spread of the projects, there's over 100,000 installations worldwide of Luxone smart homes and commercial installations. And in fact, even today, half of all new builds in Austria use Luxone. That's not half of smart homes, that's half of new builds in Austria, their home country. So you can see how well respected and how reliable that system is at this point in time. It really has got out there, and we're really delighted to be working with that as the core of our offering.
So, Scott, let's say that Mark was an ordinary customer, and I'm sure you agree he's not, but where would this journey start?
Well, in essence, as early as possible. Always say it's good to get in touch early. Maybe whenever your planning is going through or is likely to go through, and the general house that you want to build, and from there we can really start to think about the entire system. It's a design-led process. It's absolutely crucial that you don't come in at first fix complete and try to shoehorn in some of this technology. We should always be trying to make a system that works for you rather than try and ship some products and install some boxes in the wall. That's a different approach. That's the kind of Amazon approach where you're maybe retrofitting some equipment or setting some of this technology out on the countertops. We're talking here about a much more personalized and bespoke type of installation.
Mark, then, how did you brief Scott?
So obviously we had a fairly good idea of the areas that we wanted, the areas that were important, having tried lots of different systems, as I said, over the years. Something like automated lighting, for example, was probably high on the list because that's something we had set up previously, although wasn't really 100% reliable. But we saw that the principle was good, walking in the room and the lights come on. It's actually a surprisingly important thing. Once you've had it, it's really nice to have. So things like that we'd done, other things that we'd thought, well, maybe don't really need that, or it was a lot of trial and error over those years. But we found that when we sat down with Scott and discussed the capabilities of Luxone, that nearly every meeting we had, probably Scott would agree that the specification grew and grew, because when you start this journey and you can see what's available, for example, multi-room audio in the bedroom, so you can have that waking you in the morning, and then you want to add speakers in other rooms because that can become a way to ring the doorbell in different rooms. The doorbell comes through the speakers, text-to-speech alerts as well. So all these things build and snowball, and the integration makes everything work together so seamlessly that, as I say, the spec started off modest, and we ended up with a fairly comprehensive system.
If I understand you correctly, you've got the cabling that's going to form part of the house, and then it sounds like you've got all these gadgets that you can plug in. Is that a fair description? Just blow it away if that's rubbish.
So probably, we've built a house that's fairly semi-minimal, and so it was important that there weren't really any boxes or things on the walls, or apart from the beautiful glass Luxone Touch Pure switches. But all the gubbins and the gadgets are probably in the plant area, which is just off our garage. Some cabinets on the wall and a data rack out there. So it's all fairly invisible. Scott even organises some invisible speakers. So the speakers in the barn up in the vaulted ceiling are plastered over speakers, so there's nothing really to see. And we built a subwoofer into the kitchen island. We've a large kitchen island, and there was a useful void in there that we decided to try the subwoofer in there, and that worked really well. So definitely there doesn't need to be anything on show. I think less is more. No sort of whizzy lights and touch screens. So we have one touch screen in the kitchen, so we can access all the subsystems in one central location, and that is useful. But you don't really want to have to walk to the touch screen every time you do something, or pull your phone out of your pocket. So Luxzone's wall switches are a sort of a 5-zone switch, so they have a large central touch zone in the middle. And pressing that brings the lights on. Pressing it again goes to the next scene. Pressing it again goes to the next scene. Top right is volume up on the audio in that room. Bottom right corner, volume down. And then the other side is mostly used for blinds. So blinds up, blinds down. So switches are easy to understand. They are the same in every room. So you don't have to relearn or you don't have to think about it. If you have visitors in the house, they can come in and mash their palm on the switch and the lights will come on. In fact, probably with our movement sensors, the lights will come on in the room as they walk in anyway, so they don't even need to touch the switch.
Scott, on the wiring front, the question that I asked earlier on, I was thinking of, can you put all the cabling in and then plug the gadgets in later? But it sounds to me as if you really want to do it all in one hit so that everything vanishes and it just looks seamless.
That's the idea, yeah. And ideally you would do everything at once. But of course, sometimes we have to be a little more pragmatic if budget is a concern, or if there's a certain phase to the project, maybe 2 or 3 phases of rollout. And that's where a pre-wire for some of the systems can be very useful. Now, by its very nature, the system should be designed, of course, and as part of that, you get a cable plan, ideally. So if you're going to some technology professional, you'd probably be expecting them to supply you or your electrical contractor a good detailed cable plan to ensure that the systems are installed, or the cabling for the systems are installed to that spec. And also some of that pre-wire allowance for adding something in later on. Maybe you're not fitting out all the rooms with audio, but you want to allow for that in the future. And maybe you want to allow for, say, an extension that you may do down the line. That can be thought of at the start as well. And if that's all planned in, it makes the whole journey a lot smoother.
Now, rookie question here, the internet. How much are we using the internet, if at all?
Yeah, well, it's a great question, and one that people are interested in. So first of all, it's important to say that Luxzone does not require the internet to operate. So that again was another reason for choosing the system. It doesn't rely on an internet connection. There's no reliance on cloud servers or anything. Everything happens locally in the house from the little mini server in the cabinet. You can, of course, choose to enable remote access to the system, which is over a secure SSL link, and that gives you access and monitoring when you're away from the home. But there are dangers of other systems out there, and security and even more so maybe privacy is a big concern. I think, again, looking back to what we tried out in the previous house, there are the cheap no-brand Wi-Fi bulbs and switches, and they're probably the biggest threat. You're giving these devices full access to your network. Privacy-wise, some of the big names out there, Scott said Amazon and the rest, are doing some smart speakers at an unbelievable price, that probably below cost to get into your home. So you got to wonder, when things are that sort of price, are you the product in those situations?
Yeah, and having that lack of reliance on the internet just means your system is that much more stable and reliable. We've heard stories maybe a couple of years back of different smart home systems that were very reliant on the internet. And then, of course, the app that you have to use to turn on your bulb, all of a sudden your lights don't work. Now, things have improved in that world, but still there can be a heavy reliance on the network and a heavy reliance on an internet connection on some of those systems. And that's why we love the solution that we offer, not reliant on the internet at all, but it adds that other layer of option. You can get the weather forecast pulled in, so that can help to compensate your heating if it needs to come on a little bit earlier some morning because there's cold weather forecast. It can use that information. And of course, as Mark said, they're remote access. And that's both for the homeowner to remotely access the system, maybe to check in on things or to let somebody in remotely if that's what you want to do. Or it could be just for maintenance. So at your Loxone partner, if you're entrusted them to access your system remotely to do some maintenance or to check up on things for you, that can be a great option to just keep an eye on how everything's going.
So that fear of waking up one day and then discovering all the phones ringing and whatever else, the lights flashing downstairs because someone's hacked your system, is not going to happen. Again,
it comes from a network security standpoint. The measures that have been taken and are continually improved on mean that is somewhat unlikely. They have industry standard networking security functionality in place there to make sure that is mitigated as much as possible. And of course, the weakest link in most of these systems is usually, unfortunately, the people who live there and passwords. And we always encourage people to make sure they have a secure password if they have remote access enabled.
Yeah, I had one of those things saying, you haven't changed your password in a while, you must change this. And it's all too easy, isn't it? Just think, can I click the later option and come back to that in a bit. Now, Mark's house obviously is a high performance house. So I don't know who wants to take this one, but what has that meant for automation in terms of heating? Is anything really happening?
Yeah, well, I maybe start. That was an important aspect too, because we're not a passive home, but we're hopefully a low energy home. We have an air tightness rating of 1.9, so we're in the lower end of a standard sort of build, I'd imagine. So yes, we're looking to minimize our energy use like everybody else. So Loxone is already integrated with our Hitachi heat pump, but it will also connect with domestic batteries, EV chargers, things like that. Just today, Scott and I were discussing, we had a case today where it was quite a cold, wet morning, and then the sun came out around midday and the temperature rose quite quickly in the barn. There's a lot of glass in the front of our barn, and we're looking at if we can use some of that information that Scott mentioned from the weather forecast, maybe to have a look at the solar aspect that's due during the day to see if we can even compensate for that. Forgetting about the temperature outside, what's going to be in the afternoon, have a look at the solar and see if we can back off the heat pump in the morning possibly. So yes, it definitely plays nicely with performance homes. It's also quite a flexible system, and I know Loxone are increasingly being used in commercial buildings, hotels, office blocks. I think they even did a football stadium a couple of years ago. So it's incredibly scalable, and there's not really much that it can't handle.
And in terms of all that energy that you mentioned there, and especially in these higher performance passive style houses, a lot of modern ones will have a lot of glass, and that can of course cause an issue with solar gain, as I'm sure your listeners will be familiar with, Ben. That can be a real issue. And sometimes the best way to handle that is shading. And what better way to have your house shaded than have it automatically shaded based on time of day, outside temperature, position of the sun. Whenever your blinds and your shades are connected into your smart home system, that same system that operates your heating can also operate your shading. So you won't find a situation where it's pulling the blinds down to cool the room at the same time that the heat thinks it needs to be on. That can all be intelligently monitored. And of course, if you open a window to cool down the house, that could automatically turn off the heating as well in that room, because everything is interconnected and those intelligent decisions can then be made by the system.
Does this allow you then to really keep totally cool on those hottest days of the year? Have you any examples from a passive house, Scott, of what the temperatures have been like inside on a really hot day?
Well, it all depends on what is available. We can, of course, control whatever shading is there. And as you'll know, the shades in the inside don't tend to reflect the heat just as much as the shades in the outside. But if you can get shutters, external shutters with that kind of parabolic slat system, then that can really help to reduce that. And again, as the sun moves around the house, the system can respond to that. So as it moves, it can rotate and tilt those slats just enough to reflect the sun without plunging you into darkness. Again, on a case-by-case basis, you'll see different results there depending on what shading system is available.
This is Northern Ireland as well, I'd have to say.
That's true.
What does that mean, Mark?
It's generally grey and wet even in the summer.
You must have a couple of nice days, please.
Well, we do. And to be fair, even if it is cold outside, a day like today, like I mentioned, if the sun's out, it's amazing the gain you can get from the solar aspect, and our building's working really well in that respect. We have an overhang at the front, a 2-metre overhang, south facing. And it's amazing to see, about last December when the house was being built, the sun was right the whole way into the barn. And yet in the summer months, we moved in about the middle of July, and the sun was only making it maybe 1 or 2 meters into the barn, so that overhang is really cutting out the high summer sun really well. We've got key light roof lights in there as well. Scott's controlling those through Luxone, so that's another great way to dump the heat. If the room starts to overheat, the system has full control of the key lights. It can open them to dump some heat. It can also, there's a weather station on the roof, and if the rain started or the wind picked up, it could automatically close the key lights in as well. And just all these things, there's a 90s buzzword coming, synergy, about all these things. But it is true, the more subsystems that feed into the system, the more intelligent the whole thing is.
Yeah, and I guess the question that I have at the back of my mind is about when you've tried to keep the design simple, are we starting to complicate it again by being able to have this automation?
Totally depends on really what's needed for the house, and that's why it needs to be design led. It could be that the brief is simply some really good lighting control, and you want to reduce the clutter in the walls, and you want to get rid of all those different switches and room controls and all those things that lie about the place, and replace that with some automated lighting with some switches where you want a bit of manual control. So that could be the entry level type system. Maybe you want to bring in the heating then, of course, as well. If that is a underfloor system with multi-zone temperature control, that can be done too. And it really scales from there. Mark mentioned the multi-room audio that can come into play, and that has some really great advantages. So you can have your doorbell going through it, as Mark said. You can have your announcements going through that, the music itself, various different ways to use those systems. So at its core, yeah, the system can be complex, but the nature of that means that day to day, there's less that you need to do with it. Generally, your installer will take on that complexity and leave you with a system that does an awful lot for itself.
Yeah, I think that's a good point Scott makes. It's up to your partner in this thing to take all the complexity out of it for the homeowner. And certainly that's what Scott's done for us. My better half would not have any interest in technology at all, but loves the system, and it's because it makes all those things simple. Even the case of those key light roof lights that I mentioned, you would normally have to hook out a key light remote control somewhere to do that, or you would have to change the temperature somewhere else. So all these things are available from the phone in your pocket, from the iPad on the wall, or most of the time just operating themselves completely autonomously.
Mark, all of this stuff that you've got in your home then, has it taken any time to get used to, or is it second nature?
I think it's second nature to me. But again, I get back to this thing where the complexity is taken out of it. A lot of people's experience of home automation or smart home is probably negative. It seems a great idea to be able to control your lights from your phone until about 10 minutes after you get it and you realise what's involved in taking your phone out of your pocket and unlocking it and getting to the app in the right tab, and it's a nightmare. And then that's just the app for your lights. Then you've got another app to control your heating and another app for your curtains. So smart is a word that's put in front of many things these days, which really means remote control, and often not a great experience. So this is different. This is integrated, proper home automation. So you probably have to make that distinction. You can change stuff yourself, like on the Luxone app. We can change lighting scenes, things like timer delays. I think is it autopilot designer, Scott? You can set up scheduled events and things like that. But that's always a balance between what his side of the work is and on how much customization that we want to be able to do. We're in 3 months now, I think, and we're still probably fine-tuning things with Scott. Certain light switches. For example, we had a switch in our utility room which we had Scott configure for our garage doors. So you don't have to be sitting in the garage sitting in the car rather, pressing your remote to open the garage door. You can touch the switch on the way out in the morning. So by the time you're sitting in the car, the garage doors are already up and you're ready to drive out. So when the system's smart like that, and anything can be pretty much reprogrammed to do anything else, then the flexibility is there.
It's that balance, as you said there, Mark, between having the power to do anything and also then making that work for whoever's in the house. So another thing we did for Mark there recently was just reconfigure the switch at the back door to just open the blind at the back door rather than the rest of the blinds in that room. And it sounds like a simple thing, but it just made sense in that location and very easy to do with this kind of system. If that was a traditionally wired house and you wanted to change what a switch did, well, that would be a bit of a session, getting the electrician back and maybe rewiring something, maybe trying to pull a cable through the ceiling again. Not very easy to do with a traditional wiring setup. Thankfully, with a smart home, a lot of that is just programming and reconfiguration.
And you mentioned integration right at the beginning, so I think as this is one of the biggest issues, are we saying that the systems that you're using, actually integration's not the problem because it all works together?
It's a mixed bag out there, to be honest, Ben. There's quite a lot of options available, and this is, I think, where a lot of people get confused in what they should be doing. What we do is offer a system that can do both really fast install, really reliable, and a great choice of products for a customer who just wants it to work first time out of the box, so to speak. We do that. But we also offer that custom integration where needed. So there might be a bit of an edge case solution, maybe a bit of a different heating source, maybe a few different heat sources, for example, and we can bring those all together. But for 90% of the time, our kind of standard offering is exactly what they need. So having the power to do both is what I suppose makes our offering somewhat unique, in that it can do the really standard everyday smart home, but can also do those little bespoke touches that are sometimes needed just to make that project right.
And Scott, as we know on any build, costs come at you from all directions. How much are we going to have to pay? Any examples from basics right up to a very complex scenario, whatever's going to cost us the most?
Yeah, it scales, and that's the beauty about it. There's no really hard numbers. Everything's project dependent, but you could spend a few grand getting a really decent lighting control system in maybe a couple of rooms, and that would be a really great user experience there. And then, of course, the world's your oyster. You can scale that to a massive mansion with various swimming pools and ballrooms and all sorts of things. It really depends how much it needs to scale for the project. A bit like a kitchen. You can have a variety of different finishes and levels of luxury in a kitchen fit out, but you can have a functional level that you can start at. And then, as we said earlier, it is possible to add to if you needed to in the future.
And what about overkill? You know, we're talking about speakers, having them built into the ceilings. Yeah, that's fine. But, you know, do we want one in this bathroom? What about the kids' rooms? Do you just put them everywhere? Or is there a point where you think, hold on, this is actually this corridor, I can wait till I get downstairs?
Yeah, exactly. It comes down to being that, it's that word pragmatic again, whatever is needed to be appropriate in that space. That said, with the offering that we can give now, it does make sense that you can install it in more places than you may have a couple of years ago. You don't have to have high-end audio everywhere. It's probably a good idea to have the better audio in those living room spaces. Maybe you have a room that you like to listen to music in. If you want to have the doorbell audible upstairs in the back bedroom, yeah, that's where multi-room audio can be very practical and very useful. It doesn't need to be high-end. You don't need to spend thousands of pounds on a speaker by any means, but you do get all those extra features should you wish to. But again, it's scalable. You don't have to have it everywhere, and we always take the lead on what the customer wants to do there. Some people do want that everywhere, and some people just want it to be useful.
3 months in then, Mark, do you think you got it right this time?
Yeah, we're delighted. Ben, I have to say, yeah. Luxon took, actually we went with Scott about a year ago, I think it was this time last year maybe, and we went to their show house in Austria and stayed for the weekend, and that really was an eye-opener, and I hope we have gone some way to recreating that here. Certainly we're very pleased with what we've done, and there's some tinkering, yes, to get things finished and just exactly the way we want it, but no, I have to say we're really delighted with the system.
And the other thing, Mark, I'm sure you found it really useful for all your blogging and articles and things on the website, because I'm itching for another project here at House Planning Help. But what about for you? What's next?
Well, that's a second self-build, and quite a few people said to us that you need to do a third one to get it right. But I think if you did the 33rd one, you'd still be making mistakes. We didn't get everything right, certainly, but a lot more than we did the last time. So we're happy. I think this will be my last self-build. I read something the other day. Someone was talking about some of the more DIY smart home systems and the amount of tinkering that they needed, and the guy's line was, "I want to live in my home, not work on it." And that pretty well sums it up for me.
Yeah, you're building a home, aren't you? Scott, any last words from you?
Yeah, well, certainly if anybody, I suppose, has bad experiences with smart home, which we do hear about occasionally, put those on pause and try and get somewhere where you can experience a real smart home. It's not the kind of thing that everybody feels that they need, but then not everybody needed automatic lights in their car, electric windows in their car, remote central locking, all these things that we've come to maybe expect from our vehicles. We still, for some reason, put a key in our door and open our windows manually and adjust the heating manually. So just consider that the bad experiences you've maybe had or heard about with smart homes are possibly those DIY products that people tend to install themselves at the weekends and then tear their hair out whenever they don't quite work as promised.
Well, gentlemen, really enjoyed that today. It's an area that I know I'm weak on, but I feel I've learnt a lot. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Ben.
Thank you, Ben. Thanks for having us. Great.
Head online to take a look at the show notes that accompany this session, houseplanninghelp.com/292, where you can review the main information once again in our summary. We've got photos of Mark's build, some of the automation included. If you've got a comment or you'd like to ask a question, you can do that at the bottom of the show notes. We've also got all of the social media links and links to the websites of Automated Home, Epitome Living and Luxzone as well. houseplanninghelp.com/292. So we have a couple of things to finish up on today. Firstly, there's an iTunes review. This in from Scotty1974, and the title is Great Podcast. I've listened to every one of these, and they are just great. Fantastic insights into modern self-build techniques with a focus on sustainability. Ben is great at interviewing an amazing variety of people, and I never miss an episode. I've learned loads about passive house and air tightness and why it all matters. We didn't end up doing a self-build, oh no, in the end, but we hope to one day. And I will be much wiser and more prepared having listened to these podcasts. So glad that Ben eventually found a plot and finished his own passive house. Keep up the good work, says Scott. Scott, I wish you luck. Just stay determined. One day. And we do love your reviews. I'm well aware you can be listening in a variety of different ways. So if it offers you the opportunity, whatever platform it is, to write a review, please just explain to others what it's all about. And hopefully that in turn will lead more people our way. My call to action is to check out the Hub. This is our membership community that we started a few years ago, and where we try to continue the learning, make it more interactive as well, with videos, with live trainings, with the members forum and so on. So new video to tell you about. This is going to be one of the last of my own case study. It seems incredible. I've been in the house 2 years and I'm still putting in video episodes, different chapters of my own build, but it's not going to last for much longer. So this one looks at specifying appliances for the new kitchen, the installation of the kitchen, also why the final air test was a slight cause for concern. You know, at the time, these things are so serious. And then as we got towards the end, it's quite funny. So find out what was happening there. We've got our latest training session. This one is looking at Portree Passive House. Mike Coe and his partner, Lizzie Stoodley. That's a first for me. I haven't had Lizzie on one of our calls before, so that's great. We've just been getting updates the whole way through, and it's amazing how much you learn just looking at some of the images, some of the things that he's actually ended up doing himself. I know Mike always said he was going to do, he likes doing the electrics, I think it is, but he's ended up doing more than that, and there are reasons for that, which we go into there. So that's new in the Hub. We've got the courses, we've got office hours where you can get input from me. Check out what it's all about, houseplanninghelp.com/join. Next time, Zach Semke, director of Passive House Accelerator, is my guest. All sorts to talk about, including one of his favourite topics, which is how Passive House goes hand in hand with our clean energy transition. So find out more about that next time. Thanks for listening. The House Planning Help podcast is produced by Regen Media, content that matters.